Content warning. The following is a series of videos about the enemy of the Garou, the Wyrm. The cosmic entity representing all things bad, 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 and worse, the very force of corruption itself. Now, I won't dwell on unsavory descriptions, but I will have to reference things like abuse, violence, death, self-harm, and severe mental issues, to name just a few. So, viewer discretion is advised. Introduction. The goal is to give storytellers a better understanding of the Wyrm as a spiritual force of corruption, give hints on how to represent its influence in-game, and provide tools where I can. For example, by the time we're done, the next time a player asks you if something smells of the Wyrm when using the gift Sense Wyrm, you should be able to say something like this. As you become attuned to the Wyrm's influence, you feel warmer, as if you were just done with a heavy workout. You don't actually smell anything, but you're reminded of the scent of something foul burning, and you're overwhelmed by the memory of a past lover's perfume. Yes, you certainly do get the feeling that this place has wormish resonance beyond what you'd expect. This was clearly more than a common bar brawl. As the episodes go, you'll learn why I use those specific elements to describe the Wyrm taint, and how it can be used to guide players along. Hopefully, we'll give you inspiration and ideas on how to go beyond the tired, monstrous eco-terrorist cliché. By the time we're done, you should see that werewolf is actually a lot more Call of Cthulhu than it is Captain Planet. Yes, sure, they defend forests. That's usually where they live, and their enemies are constantly testing their defenses. But they are fighting against the cosmic force of corruption, not the cosmic force of pollution. One includes the other for sure, but it also goes far beyond it. Their enemy is the very voice that convinces folks to lash out in hatred, to let their peers drown in misery, to succumb to greed. It's even the one that murmurs that it's okay to just let it happen. So listen, and you will see that werewolves fight against the source of all evil in creation, one that infects the hearts and minds of all things, including their own. We should all know the story by now, of the cosmic struggle between the wild, which is creation, the weaver, order, and the Wyrm, entropy, has shattered any semblance of balance in the world. That the weaver trapped the Wyrm tightly within her webs, dragging it into madness. In this episode, we'll start exploring what this actually means. This rather basic premise, in fact, entails a hell of a lot. The first and most immediate thing to understand is that while the Wyrm is the enemy now, it wasn't always the case. It was never its intention for things to be this way. Once, the Wyrm was an essential part of the cycle, the natural end of all things. It used to be good, insofar as an unknowable entity can be described in such a way. Imagine if nothing ever died of natural causes. How many billion more humans there would be on Earth? How many more billions of all species of plants and animals would all be walking over each other, suffocating, but never dying? So yes, the Wyrm used to be good, up to and until the point the Weaver went in a rage over its inability to control the other two. It may seem trivial, but this is important. It implies there's a history there you can use to give depth to your stories and your monsters. This gives you 3 variations, or shades of gray areas, to be explored. Now, the names I'm going to give aren't from the books, but for simplicity, let's call them the uncorrupted, the corrupted, and the incarnate. Under uncorrupted would be any spirits or creatures tied to the Wyrm's original aspect of entropy, serving that purpose without being corrupted themselves or at least not quite crossed over yet. After all, entropy is still a thing, and if a concept exists, then it is represented in the spirit world. Unfortunately, the books don't explore this notion much, outside of one of the many possible versions of the perfect Metis metaplot. The only truly canonical example of this is the Ananasi, the were spiders. They all serve Queen Ananasa, but they also each belong to a faction aligned with the precepts of one member of the triad, the goal being to bring true balance. In other words, an entire third of their species is devoted to the worm's original purpose. Are they in danger of being spiritually corrupted by the worm's influence? Yeah, but they have Ananasa's spiritual protection to help them stay true to the cause, at least most of them. The point is, non-corrupt worm-aspected entities can exist, but use those sparingly and with care. They're extremely rare and very likely fighting a losing battle against spiritual corruption unless they have serious mojo to help them resist. If you do use them, take into account that to most Garou, your players included, the worm is the enemy, plain and simple. Odds are your players will attack, no questions asked. No one expects to stumble into uncorrupted worm entities. Why should they? Even if you were to drop hints, they'll probably expect it to be a trick. Don't fault them for this. It's a completely natural reaction. After all, they didn't stop to ask questions all the other times they met any worm creatures you sent their way. So make sure they either know in advance that the spirit or entity is unique and or part of something greater, or plan the fact that they're going to attack as the catalyst to the story. Not one where they're blamed for the creature's death, but one where they put it out of its misery and now must finish what the poor thing started. Next up, the corrupted. Half the monsters and banes in service to the worm used to be something else. The prime example among those are Skullpigs. Many Garou still believe the War of Rage was justified, that they destroyed breeds corrupted by the worm. That is a convenient lie. The fact is, none of the breeds were corrupted. Not back then anyway. The werewolves were manipulated into those wars by servants of the worm. The result of which is that now one breed is corrupt. The Grundor, or wereboars, used to be responsible for cleansing the lands. Given time, they could take a hellhole and turn it into a lush paradise. It isn't known exactly how it came to be so, but instead of dying out, they became something else. Monsters. Skullpigs. From cleansers to those who spread taint wherever they go. Similar stories could be told of any number of monsters or banes you come up with. Or you could hit the books, especially the various editions of Book of the Worm. They're filled with examples. Remember, the worm's province isn't evil. It's corruption. Also, many of those under its influence once served the Wild, the Weaver, or Gaia. To name but one example, in W20's core book, on page 443, it shows you the Banes known as Dreammakers. Those are djinn-like creatures who literally helped the Wild and the Weaver shape the world. And now they use these abilities to reshape the world in ways that corrupt poor mortals' dreams. Any corrupted's purposes end up twisted to terrible ends. But what was once pure can be again. If that's your story, redemption may be possible. If nothing else, you can use this knowledge to make your world feel alive, lived in. The monster of the week doesn't exist in a vacuum. Hell, the World of Darkness' entire foundation is letting you play the monsters, right? From their perspective, it shows you that even monsters have depths. Your monster has a past, has hopes, dreams, a unique worldview. Just because Banes aren't playable doesn't make this any less true for them. And lastly, we have the Incarnate, where we point out that not all things used to be good. When the worm changed, new concepts emerged. Greed, sickness, and countless more. With those new ideas came new spirits to represent them. Some Banes really are just representations of evil concepts and cannot, ever, be redeemed. They can still have depth if you need them to. Those are best used as claw feathers. But how would you even do that? Well, you'll have a ton of possible applications for Banes representing particular emotions in episode 3 in regards to their greater role in the Wyrm's army, but for now, let's just keep it at the street level. Or, more specifically, the umbral street level. Areas of strong Wyrm influence in the Umbra tend to take 3 forms. Well, one of 3 forms. All of which are great places to encounter both corrupted and incarnate type enemies. You can find complete descriptions of these in W20's Book of the Wyrm on page 20 and 21. In a nutshell, you have blights. These are created whenever human misery swells. Colors fade in the Umbra, most buildings too, unless they're themselves bad enough to be resonant with the blight. Spirits flee the scene if they can, get converted into Banes or eaten if they can't. But places that stand in stark contrast to the blight also get to stay. These rare beacons of hope stand strong. Needless to say, blights are excellent places to find the kinds of Banes and monsters that cannot ever be redeemed. As for the kinds of story you could tell there, well, one could easily have a pack of werewolves fight to defend a good location against encroaching enemy forces. You could have a couple of skirmishes to try and weaken the blight, or you could even run an entire war campaign in the spiritual world. Similarly, hellholes appear where extreme pollution exists in the real world. These are chock full of elemental Banes, both corrupted and incarnate. That said, for incarnate enemies, the most interesting option are Callums. Callums are not found in the Penumbra. One would have to actually travel to the near Umbra to find one. They're pocket realms, more or less dedicated to a particular emotion or thought associated to one of the Urgeworms, which will be covered in episode 3. For now, let's just say those are things like hatred, violence, and greed. Callum are usually a bit more specific than that, though. They are exploration of one aspect, or theme, if you will, for each of these concepts or emotions. The appearance of the place and its denizen is directly tied to that theme. The problem is, why would your players even go there? Excellent question. They're out of the way and there's nothing to be gained by going inside of one. Doesn't that make them the perfect hiding place? An enemy of the pack, like, let's say, a lone black spiral dancer, could use one of these as refuge. But Jotun, we're talking about incarnates here, not dancers. Okay, good point. See, the thing with Callums is that they have rulers. Those are particularly powerful Banes that pretty much dictate the theme of the realm and thus most things in it. Say your players recently dealt with a blight. They may have unfinished business with a particularly powerful Bane, one that returned home to lick their wounds after defeat, in their Callums. Your players may have been victorious in the blight, but now they're fighting the creature in its own world, where it has all the advantages. If the Wyrm used to be so nice, if it is, in fact, only a victim of the Weaver, then why is he the enemy and not the Weaver? Morally speaking, the Weaver may be to blame for the entire affair, and indeed a solution to all the world's problems may be found through her, whether that be defeating her or saving her from herself. But the Wyrm is a much more immediate problem. Not by virtue of his faults, but simply because of his metaphysical location and current state of mind. When the books say it is trapped in the Weaver's web, that is an understatement of cosmic proportions. To understand that, and its many implications, we need to go back to the basics. We already know that the purview of the wild is the undefinable, all things that can or could ever be, but which never have. It is pure, infinite potential, raw creation. Nothing can take shape until they are defined. In the world of darkness, this is the principle of pattern, sometimes called naming, giving something specific parameters, limits, and properties. Many supernatural templates, including mages and mummies, can affect or alter something's pattern. But the Weaver is the one who established the default template and enforces it. She takes the wild's infinite ideas and weaves them into a specific thing with specific rules. She makes it all part of what's known as the pattern web, the thing that permeates creation itself. It is everything and everywhere. It is what werewolves must push through whenever they wish to enter the Umbra, also known as the Gauntlet. In simpler words, the Wyrm is trapped in the very fabric of reality itself, and he's trying to escape, thrashing about in pain and terror. To be free, he must tear creation apart. Hence, all the destruction and corruption. As a storyteller and a player, this notion is the key to much of Garou politics and philosophical conflict. Who's the true enemy? The Weaver or the Wyrm? Are we doing the right thing or making it worse? The party line is combat the Wyrm wherever it breeds and wherever it dwells, but just to give one example, the Stargazers have a different point of view. After all, they say, reality is made of the pattern web. It is a fleeting illusion, only true because it is made true by the Weaver and reinforced by its greatest tool, humanity's belief, what mages call the consensus. This is one reality, but it could just as easily be different, remade, redefined, if enough people believed. It stands to reason, then, that by weakening the Weaver's hold, one could make reality less static, less strictly bound, less immovable, or, more to the point, easier to slip through without bringing the whole damn thing down. But most Garou scoff at such notions. It's easier to believe that what they see is real, that the way to save the world is through claws and fangs, not meditation. There are many other theories that exist. They drive the Garou to start camps and tribes and, yes, even fight among themselves. Somewhere in all of that mess of conflicting ideologies are a lot of good role-playing opportunities and a ton of great stories to tell. Oh, and if you want to know who's correct, what is the right way to save the world, I don't know. The books don't say definitively. That's for your troop to find out in play. Next episode, we'll expand on the Wyrm's entrapment and how it shattered him into many distinct entities.